Unputdownable, Chapter 2. Alison put rocks in my coffee at home, a single small stone from our gravel driveway. She said it was my Zen practice. I had to try to remember not to choke to death, she said. On the counter beside our coffee maker, she kept a wine glass full of pebbles. I didn't know if my Zen practice extended any deeper than fishing rocks out of my mouth, but my level of awareness while drinking all liquids was greatly improved. Maybe I was well trained, or maybe I really had embarked on a path of Zen, but I started keeping a few pebbles in my pocket and rocking my own coffee when I was out in the world. So although numb and reeling because Alison had just been, apparently, kidnapped, I still had the presence of mind to down my very large coffee in a single gulp. And as I charged through the crystal ball stained glass door, there sat a small stone in my mouth, my Alison rock. Symbolically, it seemed important. Outside, the world was distressingly calm, unaffected by the recent violence. A breeze lumbered along the sidewalk like an old cat. Flat clouds hung like laundry in the nonchalant blue sky. Something, the world, the weather, should have reflected what had happened to Alison, I felt. A brutal stain on the sunlit street, an impossible summer icicle hanging from the eaves, a trickle of blood from a cloud. Even the rotten smell of evil in the air, instead of the sweet warm yeast wafting from a local bakery. I crossed the street and sat in the car, the window still open, the door ajar. "Start," I said. Alison started the car by saying, "Start." We had a keyless car. While I didn't fully understand what that meant, she had trained the car on my voice. I clearly recalled her ordering me to say start 3 different ways. Calm, serious, silly. Start, start. Start! But the car did not start when I said start with these different voicings. I stomped the pedals and hunted for secret buttons on the smooth shoulders of the console. Could the car really only be voice-operated? I called out start in more desperate voices. Start! 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 Nothing. Bart Z's 7000 was long gone. I couldn't see it anyway. But our cars were exotics, and his car, like mine, would be especially visible, and for that reason, in my mind anyway, especially findable. If I could just drive off now, I'd be able to track it down. I jumped out of the car and raised my arm for a taxi. A yellow cab slipped through the lanes, and I dove into it like a lake. "Straight ahead, please, and fast as you can," I said. The cabbie repeated what I'd said with an elliptical tone of insufficiency, as though he needed a lot more than that. He was a tall, older man. His bald head nearly brushed the soft carpet ceiling. His faded Hawaiian shirt gave the impression that he wasn't wearing pants. The car smelled of movie popcorn. "I'll explain as we go, but there's a car just like this one." I pointed to my 7000. "A couple minutes ahead of us, and I'd like to catch up to it." He crept into traffic and then began to accelerate with adequate urgency. "I can't follow it," he said, even though that was exactly what we were doing. "Like in the movies, yeah?" he continued. "Follow that car, right? Is that what you're asking?" "Exactly that, yes," I said. "Okay. In the city, I can't, because I can't in the city," he said. "Illegal." Yet again, we carried on, essentially doing just that. He eyed me in the rear view. "Even if we get lucky and find this car, if it turns down some other street, I won't be able to follow it. You understand?" I said I did. "I can catch up to that car," he added. "That's fine," I said. "It's a stalking thing," he said. "Girl was killed, privacy issue. On the one hand, this girl's life, right?" he said. And I gathered from the ensuing silence that there was no other hand. My watch jolted on my wrist. A few months ago, I'd gotten Alison and myself smartwatches. Codependent, she'd said at the time, but she'd strapped it to her wrist and began to use its tracking feature when she ran in the mornings. I'd bought the watches because I'd been swayed by the digital touch message component, which would allow Alison and I to send each other unique vibrational taps that meant yes or no, or potentially our heartbeats sometimes, and possibly even joke taps. It seemed a fun, kid-like, even semi-romantic form of communication, and maybe even useful. But after I sent Alison my first tappy, as I called them, of my heartbeat, she made me promise to never send another. Creepy, she said. Creepy, codependent. And then she stared at me. Creepy, codependent, sexual harassment, she finished, and flared her eyes. But now she'd just sent me a tappy. From the back of Bartsy's car, presumably. They probably took her phone, but hadn't thought to remove her watch yet. She'd sent me one hard tap, a hammer strike. What did it mean? Tappies could be replayed, so I did that, over and over, to not only feel the buzz of her ongoing life, but to see if I could interpret the tappy as a kind of smoke signal or dash of Morse code. Suddenly, I understood it. Actually, could you take me to the parkway? I called to the cabbie. Possibly relieved we were no longer on the verge of something illegal, the cabbie swerved us dangerously down a side street. As we rolled against our doors, a handful of popcorn skittered out from under his seat and settled around my shoes like a family of snails. "West entrance, okay?" he said. I nodded. I replayed Alison's hard tap a last time on my watch. I could have been imagining it, of course, but I sensed a single letter floating inside the tremor of her faraway, imperiled fingertip. K. Follow K, she'd mouthed to me in the car. I hadn't, of course. I had followed her. I had followed A. I didn't care about K because Alison wasn't with K. She was with Z. But here's where my possible codependence and the actual fact that I paid her salary came into helpful alignment. Because Alison knew, from her nightly reading of my novel/journal/shattered dreams, which I had made part of her job, that I called henchman K. Somehow in the moment of her abduction, she'd determined that the best way for me to find her, to save her, was to follow K. K was on foot, and when last seen was moving in the direction of the parkway. If he hadn't jumped in a car at the far side of the alley, he'd still be there. The kidnapped Alison, however, would be a mile away, and who knows where. The only choice I had, Alison knew, was to follow K. I sent her back the same punching pulse, and imagined it hammering against her wrist like a typewritten K, and giving her a single grain of peace, of relief, of hope. The cabbie pulled toward the drawstring opening of the park and stopped. 2 marble pedestals mounted with gas lanterns, topped with tiny iron spruce trees. I dropped the cabbie $100 bill and ran. To which, overpayment, the old man honked his horn twice, which I took, in my ongoing spirit of deciphering such things, as thank you. Mansard Parkway was a perfect square mile of trees, paths, follies, benches, and dog runs. It featured a main entrance on each of the compass points and was generally cluttered with city people trying very hard to be casual people. Running, cycling, walking dogs, sunbathing, trying to commune with that wild, calmer part of themselves in this little zoo of unnatural nature. Sport deodorant, beer, hot sausage, and marijuana spiced the air. I looked at my smartwatch. 10 minutes had passed since Alison's tappy. If Kay was cutting directly across the park, he'd probably be somewhere just beyond the bronze 2 children playing beneath a tree monument in the middle. I was jogging now, just below a run, the sort of pace that didn't look like fleeing or chasing, just a middle-aged executive who had gone out for a walk and suddenly realized he was late for a meeting. I didn't want to raise any suspicion. It felt contagious, as though the faster I ran, the more I'd be seen. If Kay was crossing the park directly, I could intercept him at the south gate. If I didn't see him there, I could double back toward the east gate. I slowed naturally as I crested one of the park's man-made hills. The summit was decorated with gray boulders and a lookout forest of birch trees, and suddenly I was stumbling down a steep decline on the other side and tripping along the park's crowded main thoroughfare. I veered through a family who smelled of coconut beaches and bacon. Canadians, I thought, and then danced around an old woman, humming to herself on troubled legs. She seemed intent on blocking me. Knitting needles, I thought. I eyed the street beyond the far gate and iron fence. It was too easy to imagine Kay dropping into a car. I pushed through a group of white-shirted, tie-loosened businessmen, all slightly overweight, all talking at the same time, as though playing a game where everyone had to say the same thing. Actuaries, I thought, unmarried, single men in their 40s looking for wives and trying to get healthy enough to outlive the deadlines they knew all too well. And I ran right past Kay. For the split of a second, my body seized. I literally jolted mid-step before making a hard landing that sent a painful pin into both knees somehow. I jogged then as casually as I could out through the gate and down the shadowy sidewalk toward my imaginary meeting. I slowed to a walk, glancing at the iron fencing at my side. Could I squeeze through? I eyed trash barrels and leaf piles for hats, coats, blankets, anything to disguise myself. I wasn't sure why it took me so long, but I suddenly gathered that if they'd taken Alison, they might know who I was. They might even, in fact, be after me. Or maybe they took her because they thought she'd observed something in the alley, overheard something. Was it possible the driver associate was a garden variety psychopath? She'd bumped his car, and now he was going to bump her back. I stopped when I guessed that Kay would be through the gate. I cradled my watch and tapped it, the way Alison did when she finished her runs, and then turned and blinked toward the pedestals, topped with the little iron spruce trees. No Kay, not there, and not still in the park. And then a flash. He'd crossed the street and disappeared between a moving truck and police car, then blipped back into view on the other side before disappearing down another alley. I raced across the street and stopped at the alley entrance, nodding at the policeman in the car. He seemed to be writing a ticket for the moving truck, which I saw now was parked beside a fire hydrant. I stepped into the alley and then back to the corner, long enough to verify Kay proceeding along. "This a truck, sir?" the cop's sleepy voice called. His words fell together in a twangy heap. "A truck? You mean my truck?" "No, officer," I said. He'd propped an elbow out his car window as though considering climbing out. He didn't look like a cop. His face was gentle and fallen away, soft, chinless, a speck of a mouth and baby ears. I could have, maybe should have, told him right then about Alison and Kay and Bart. But he wouldn't believe me. Not for a while, not if I read his lemonade twang rightly. He was the sort of doubtful peacekeeper who liked to get to the real bottom of things before crafting any response. Nor was he the sort of man, in my experience, who would like the sort of man I was. Somehow, if I told him about Alison, I'd end up in a single light bulb interrogation room, watching him chew tobacco and fill out make-believe forms while offering me soft drinks he'd never fetch, as Kay's blip edged off the radar screen. I stepped again into the alley. Kay was halfway down it, hazed in the mirror blind of the sea beyond. A squawk and smattering of radio clicks, and the policeman fell back into his car to thumb a handset clipped to his shoulder. He didn't look like a cop, and he didn't sound like one either. He said, "Yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am," into the handset. His voice suggested lonely nights in a beer-filled town beneath the stars far away. He tossed his parking ticket booklet onto the seat beside him. "Block your ears if you got 'em," he called out. I didn't. His sirens screamed. My hand shot to my head too late as he zoomed into traffic and whatever emergency he'd been called to attend. I turned down the alley now as Kay exited the far side, and I ran, rimming my eyes, largely blind from the sea blaze exploding through the alley's keyhole. I imagined small bites at my chest, little knocks, and then I'd be laying in the alley, finding it strangely hard to breathe, wondering what happened and why there was a puddle pressing wetly against my back. Only then would I hear the gunshots, and suddenly Kay would be standing over me, sliding an ultra-expensive, ultra-quiet, ultra-black handgun into an ultra-discreet shoulder holster. "Some might say you mess with the wrong folk here, mister," he'd say, in a voice that came from the same beer-filled town under stars as Officer Jenks, as I thought I'd call the police officer in my novel. I stopped at the end of the alley at the cement blockade of the highway bypass, which ran alongside the ocean for those wanting to avoid the city. And there he was, the little scratch of Kay, hastening over an Eiffel Tower-looking bridge that spanned the bypass. Directly on the other side lay the boardwalk and the laddery peninsula of the city dock, the Quarter-Past Quay, it was called. There was not only a cheap fish restaurant on the wharf that Alison liked, but I kept my boat there. I'd sailed it once and motored around the bay several precarious times, but mostly used the 36-foot sailboat as a writing office or a place to have drinks with Alison after dinner at the fish place. Alison had labeled my ownership of a boat I used so casually and rarely repulsive. But I loved the boat, the idea of it, anyway, and believed that my sailing days still lay ahead. I'd finish my novel and then go sailing. Become a sailor, a novelist sailor. The two went together in my head like a pair of dreams. First, I would make my dream of being a novelist come true, and then my dream of being a sailor. Work and work's reward, labor into freedom. As I rose up the stairs, Kay leapt onto the boardwalk. I was walking now, keeping pace with Kay as he began to drift along the dock, looking closely at the boats on either side, as though not sure which one was his. As I stepped off the bridge and onto the wooden planking, I smelled the sea, the hard tinge of it, the wild, salted animal and vegetable death of it. The boats anchored here extended out from the wharf in a ranking of value. Yachts and massive motherships occupied the first slots, and littler boats the further along the dock you went. A heavy warship sat well out to sea, like a fallen mountain, and a crew of Norwegian sailors in blue coats and pie hats came up onto the dock from a massive marine dinghy. I lost sight of Kay in the crowd of roughhousing sailors. I listened to their crooked laughter as they streamed by, and finally halted beside a trawler in the area where I'd last seen Kay. I wasn't so worried about losing him. I was worried about him seeing me first, because I really didn't have a plan. Or if I did, the main part of my plan involved me discreetly watching Kay until a real plan formed. Following someone who was probably a very bad person was not an easy thing to do when you yourself were not very good at very bad things. A moment of intersection between us seemed imminent, one that Kay was ready for, punching, strangling, shooting, and one that I was not. My phone buzzed, and I shook with it, buzzed as it buzzed. An unknown number. Could it be Kay, standing on the lobster boat looking down at me, phone in hand? Or Bart Z, or the driver, calling to make arrangements, $1 million in a brown paper bag? I shivered and answered. "Mr. Spring," the slow voice said. I recognized the lemonade twang of Officer Jenks. "Yes," I said, "this is Richard Spring." "That's a relief, sir. You own a black 2023 Stadia, if that's what you call this thing. 7,000? I do, I said, somewhere in the middle of his epic read of make and model. I'm sorry now. What? He said, because I had probably, to his quiet, beer-filled town under stars way of thinking, interrupted him. I do, I said, own that kind of car. Okay, good, sir. And you got a plate number of CBH643Z? I waited until his Z was deflated of every last E. Maybe, yes, I said. Don't know for sure, sir, he said. I haven't looked at the plate, I said. I just don't know it. I have a driver. I hardly know my social security number. Could it be we're in the ballpark here, as far as that plate? He said, and began to repeat the plate number. Do I need to move the car, officer? I interrupted. All I could think was that maybe the open window of the car had prompted some Good Samaritan phone call to the police. Oh, no, sir. We'll figure that part out. Yeah. Can you tell me what happened to her? To who? To Alison? I asked. That the name of the car? He said. No. What? I said. No, I just left it. I couldn't find the key. Well, it's a keyless car. I have a driver, and she had it's voice activated. So the answer is no. Actually, I'm not really sure what we're talking about here. I spun around slowly, scanning the nearby tiny boat windows for Kay's froggy face. I see, sir, I see, Officer Jenks said, and paused to give us both time to find a way forward. Well, sir, he finally said, just to be clear, you got no idea, sir, none whatsoever, what happened to her. No, I looked up and she was gone. The car, or this person you mentioned, sir. Alison, I said. Alison, the person, my driver who had the key, or what we use for a key with these new cars. So she drove away from you, sir. Your driver did, because we haven't found any bodies yet. I stopped. My breath stopped. I stopped seeing. Any what? I said. We might have to take her out by boat, he added. The car? I said. A croak. Yes, sir, unless they can tow it out of there. Out of the space across from the coffee place? I said. Across from the Crystal Ball Cafe? Were you two in some kind of squabble, I'm wondering? A fight? Could this be a form of payback, or maybe she was really upset? I put both feet on the ground and stiffened my back. The last I knew, officer, my car was legally parked on Grand Street, directly across the street from the Crystal Ball Cafe. Oh, well, gee whiz, he said. In that case, Mr. Spring, I'm sorry to inform you that she went off the Pinnacle Cliffs and dropped 270 feet, is what someone told me the height is, and landed in a heap on the shingle down there. Shingle's what they call the stony beach down there. Shingle. Just learned about that word myself. Not bad. It's on the shingle. And this car on the shingle was a Stadia 7000, I said. 2020. There was another car, I interrupted again. He groaned solemnly. Parked near mine, I continued. I think you might be mistaking that one for mine. Well, I doubt that, sir. Plates are registered to you, Mr. Spring, he said. Mr. Richard Spring. And so we wanted you to come on to the cliffs to handle some of this crash car stuff. And maybe we can put our heads together and figure out what happened here. Did you like the car? Did I like it, or did I lock it? Like it. I guess, yes. Why? Just checking theories. Maybe it was nothing but trouble and you were at your wit's end. Expensive to fix, someone said. Someone said that kind of car breaks down a lot and only got 2 stars on some website. A lot of complaints, apparently. We're just wondering if you ditched it. I was, actually. No, I said firmly. No, Officer Jenks said, sounding like he was writing the 2 letters down in his crime book. Pinnacle Cliffs, you said? To get a cab, I'd need to run all the way back to the park. Right at the top we are. Strong winds and tide coming in, so we're trying to be quick, fast, in a hurry. Your car at the bottom, some coastie guards down there now picking around. One of these things where you can't get there from here unless you're already there. And let me tell you this, bringing them guys in don't decrease the paperwork. I'll get a cab, I said. Guess you'll have to. Oop! One of them coasties is flagging us now. Looks like they did turn up a body down there somewhere. I closed my eyes and ran through it all again. Watched as Alison bumped our 7,000 into their 7,000. The driver associate rolling down his window, protesting with an arm. The expensive gold wristwatch glinting in the sunlight. Then he gets out, leaves his door slightly ajar, his window down. They had taken our car, my car, with Alison in it. And now my car had gone off a cliff, and they had found a body. I looked up at the whistle cry of a boat heading out of dock, then the gurgle of its propeller churning seawater, and I watched as a white, single-masted schooner began to motor into the bay. Kay stood at the tiller, staring back at me, still close enough to see a little twitch on his froggy face, as though he'd briefly considered waving. But it wasn't until I saw the old typewriter script of the boat's name, Unputdownable, that I realized Kay was sailing away in my boat. I blinked hard and my body chilled. I felt my Alison rock scratch a sharp line down my throat as I swallowed it.